Hello, divine creations, divine marvels, children of God. Thank you so much for dropping by this channel. So this is going to be a talk on the teachings of Bruno Groening for anyone who's new. And Bruno Groening said that what he taught was not his teaching, but simply the teachings of Jesus Christ. And very specifically, I'm going to talk about how the teachings of Bruno Groening, i.e. the teachings of Christ, are related to the 12 steps. For anyone who hasn't heard of the 12 steps, they are 12, a 12-step process in finding freedom from addictions. And what I found in my own experience is understanding the 12 steps has helped me to understand the teachings of Bruno Groening so deeply. And the two, in many ways, to me, just seem like two ways of saying almost the same thing. So I'm very excited. This is a topic I'm very passionate about. I'm very excited to be sharing it. And to anyone who's new to Bruno Groening or this channel, a warm welcome. I hope that you find both the practice of the 12 steps and the teachings of Bruno Groening have been life-changing and life-saving for me. So I hope anyone who takes either of them seriously will experience an impact in their life. And that's what I'm going to talk about, is that they are both, in essence, if you practice either one, much less both, in essence, it's a guarantee that your life will improve, because they're both based around one simple idea, that there is a higher power, and that to live well, we need that higher power. Thanks for saying hi, Magdalena. Thanks for saying hi, forever loving everything. A warm welcome to everyone who's here and everyone watching this video. So now I'm going to lead us into a little meditation, which is considered one of the 12 steps, step 11. And the form of meditation I'm going to share was shared by Bruno Groening. It's very simple. It's about actually receiving the power of God into our bodies for help and healing. To do this, please sit with your legs uncrossed, feet flat on the floor. Hands on your legs, palms facing upwards. And one more thing before I go any further, because there'll probably be some people who are new to this channel drop by. I just like to share, who are part of the 12-step movement, I'd just like to share that I am a grateful member of multiple 12-step groups. So I share that to welcome anyone who is, a part of any 12-step group. And what you're going to hear today is two things. The essence of the 12 steps, regardless of what group you're a part of. There's many different 12-step groups. But then you're also going to hear a little bit the deep similarities and overlap between the 12 steps and the teachings of Christ. So again, always happy to have my regular viewers drop by, and a very warm welcome to anyone who's new. So to take in this divine energy, please sit with your legs uncrossed, feet flat on the floor, hands on your legs, palms facing upwards. When you're ready, close your eyes. Maybe take a couple deep breaths to relax, to come into the present moment. And now handing over to your understanding of a higher power everything that you find burdensome, fears, resentments, life situations, things from the past, things you're worried about in the future, any illnesses, please hand them over and trust them to a higher power. So just let's spend a little time just doing that and trusting any life situations. And now opening yourself, open your heart, your soul, your being to receive the divine life force that helps and heals. Asking to receive it and observing your body, noticing what you feel, having the intention to take this energy in. So we'll sit for a few minutes in silence doing this, observing the body, noticing what you feel. Having the intention to take this energy in. So I invite people to continue to tune in. I'm going to share and read a little. So the 12 steps are traditionally are for people who are out of control, who have an addiction that they cannot stop. That's why the first step is admitted we were powerless, that our lives had become unmanageable. So a very strong addiction takes one on a downward spiral. And at a certain point, the person's literally unable to free themselves from it. You can say something like, well, just don't drink or don't drug or don't gamble or don't da da da. However, anyone who is gone far enough down the hole of addiction will tell you that that's not sufficient. They've literally lost the power of choice. Now, this is deeply related to what Bruno Groening taught. He said that if a person takes on enough evil, and personal experience, I can tell you, or negativity, dis-ease, dis-health, well, not dis-health, disharmony, sure, dis-health. And that's exactly where addiction takes you. It just more and more and more as it drags a person down. So what Bruno Groening said is that at a certain point, once someone's taken on enough negativity, enough evil, they're literally not able to free themselves. They need a helping hand to pull themselves out. And that's really the foundation and essence of the 12 steps. is that once you've reached a certain point spiritually, you can't free yourself. And many addicts literally kill themselves because they're in denial of the fact that they can't free themselves. They'll say, "Oh, I can do it this time," when 1,000 times to the pat, and they've tried 1,000 times, and every time they go back to the addiction, they're like, "This time I'll do it," and then that ends up being their last time. It's one of the most baffling aspects of a real addiction. Paradoxically, someone who can admit the fact, "Hey, I can't solve this. This problem is bigger than me." It completely opens the doorway for a new solution. And you can see the logic of it. If you're trying to lift something that's too heavy for yourself and you keep saying, "I can do it, I can do it," you're never going to lift it up. But then if you finally say, and let's say it's really important, you've got to lift this heavy thing. But then if you acknowledge, like, "Hey, I can't lift this up," then that opens you to other possibilities, like maybe I'll go get some friends, or maybe I'll get a device, or maybe I'll this, maybe I'll that. But as long as there's this crazy idea like, "Oh, I can do it," that simple idea has killed many an addict. And Bruno Groening said the same thing, but he wasn't speaking about addiction. He was speaking about evil in general, as in the force of evil, the energy and the consciousness that literally leads people towards destructive behaviors. He was absolutely adamant that human beings could not overcome that force without divine help. Which takes us to the second step of the 12 steps: came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So the addict has admitted, "Hey, I can't overcome this addiction." Then they have to be open. They don't have to believe, but they have to be at least open to the possibility that there is a higher power that can solve this problem, which they cannot solve. Now, let's really sit with this for a moment. It's profound meditation, also for people who aren't addicts, to ask ourselves, what are our limits as human beings? What are the things that we literally cannot change? And for such things, are we open to the idea that there is a power greater than ourselves? Now, Bruno Groening is famous for being a healer, when actually he said healing was only 10% of what his work was about. But tens of thousands of people experience spontaneous healings in his presence. And then those healings have continued. But it's the same thing. There has to be a willingness or an openness to the possibility that healing's possible, much less that there is a higher power that can do that healing. So let's reflect on this, the first two steps, and of course, Bruno Groening's ideas about the necessity for divine help to overcome evil, and the necessity for belief in the divine power to help us overcome this evil. So continuing to observe your body, noticing what you feel. And one of the interesting aspects of the 12 step program is that each person gets to define that higher power for themselves. Many people have been taught things by members of a particular religion about a higher power that they just don't believe in. And so they say, oh, that's not true, so there must not be a higher power. In English, we call that throwing out the baby with the bathwater. The 12 steps offer people freedom to really define that higher power for themselves. And interestingly enough, Bruno Groening talked about God all the time, but he actually said very little. He just said that God was goodness and all around us, actually inside of us as well. That God was available to help and heal, and that God was truly a loving parent, which is a poetic or fancy way, a poetic and a heartfelt way of saying that which gave us existence, and that God was available to help. And that's really the essence of what he said. He talked about God all the time, but he actually didn't say a whole lot. He kind of, in essence, left that up to each person to form their own relationship with this higher power and understand it, define it, serve it, even worship it as they felt called to do. Instead of saying, this is what God is, he said, this is how you connect to God, which is actually the same thing that the 12 steps do. So from there, the third step made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. So this isn't necessarily, this is a very logical thing for an addict to do who's literally headed towards their destruction, is unable to stop, and hears from other people that there is a higher power that can literally solve their problem, solve the thing that they can't do. Bruno Groening said it very simply, that we have to follow God, that actually that's what's natural, to align ourselves with the divine and then follow it. After making that decision, that takes us to step 4, made a fearless and searching moral inventory of ourselves. The idea being, well, God's all powerful, all around us. Well, what's the problem? What's going on? Well, actually, the problem lies inside ourselves. That we need to see, what are the things inside of me? What am I thinking, doing that's cutting me off from God? And so that's what step 4 is about. Now, Bruno Groening called people to self-reflection and honesty, that we need to look inside ourselves and be honest with ourselves, what we find in there. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. You can think of this as a bit of a confession, but notice that 2 of the 3 people you're confessing to are yourself and God. And getting honest with yourself, with God, and with another human being. Now, this confession to another person isn't something that Bruno Groening recommended that I'm aware of, though I can't imagine he would be opposed to it. And having experienced confession on multiple levels, it's a very, very powerful ritual practice to really get honest, first with ourselves, then with God, then another human being. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So in looking inside ourselves, every person who's honest is going to find all sorts of things: greed, selfishness, dishonesty, fear, anxiety, resentment, laziness. Not that that's all that they'll find, but they'll find many things. We all have habits that are very harmful to ourselves and others. So then the question is, are we willing to release those habits And that is what step 6 is about, is inquiring, like, hey, am I willing to let this stuff go? Now, of course, Bruno Groening spoke about it being absolutely essential to give away, to hand over everything not good, and specifically to hand it over to the divine. That takes us to step 7. Humbly ask God to remove our defects of character. Recognizing these different bad habits, character traits, and that's um, exactly what it sounds. Asking God to remove them. The interesting thing is what we're doing is asking God to remove the things that cut us off from God, from the divine. So let's sit with some of this a little bit, the idea of deciding to follow God, the idea of looking inside ourselves and being honest, and then asking the divine to remove everything we find inside of ourselves that is not good. Continuing to observe the body, noticing what you feel. As you become aware of any bad habits or tendencies, hand them over and ask for help humbly. That brings us to step 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So this is not something that I'm aware of that Bruno Groening spoke of. I mean, I speak from my own experience. It's very liberating to, having reflected on ourselves and on our past, it became quite clear to me, and most people who've done this found the same thing, that wow, we've actually done quite a bit of harm. Sometimes small harm, sometimes big harm. And to go and do, uh, and then to go and to clean that up can be so healing and so freeing, which is what step 9 is. Make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Meaning going and making an apology, making it right if possible, but keeping in mind the well being of the other person. So we're 2/3 of the way through the 12 steps. The first 3 steps are about trusting in the divine. Steps 4 through 9 are about cleaning up the past, cleaning up all the things that disconnected us from the divine. And then steps 10, 11, and 12 are about how to stay connected to the divine and how to live. Step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admit it. There's a couple parts of this. One is, hey, if we hurt someone else, again, we need to very quickly go and apologize and make it right. But another part of it is to be mindful of what are the things that block us off from the divine. And as they arise, to very swiftly ask God to remove them, and then turn our attention to someone we can help. The main ones the 12 steps identify are resentment, fear, selfishness, and dishonesty. Because the whole point of the 12 steps is to get us connected to the divine power. Literally, it's almost the exact words. Because uh, someone who fell very deeply into an addictive behavior gets to the place where they have no power. And so, or they were running on self power. That didn't go so well. So, the whole point is to learn to run on higher power. So, step 10 helps people to stay clear on what are the things that block off that higher power, and then swiftly and quickly remove those blocks so that they can be reconnected or stay connected to the divine. Step 11 is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. So there's kind of two parts. One of them is being connected to God, which I've already referenced. And of course, Bruno Groening said to be connected to God, that is everything. And he also, backing up a moment to step 10, he spoke of how important it is to watch our thoughts. That one negative thought taken in, if we really say yes to a negative thought, that actually cuts off our connection from God. And so that we vigorously need to watch our thoughts and vigorously hand over and separate ourselves from any and all negative thoughts. So, step 11 is about the practice of staying connected. And here we are practicing one of those things right now, meditation, but to also seek connection all throughout the day. And the 12 steps has a beautiful offering for that. As we go through the day, to remind ourselves, I'm no longer running the show, meaning I'm not in charge, the divine is in charge. Asking, how can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. And then waiting to be guided, waiting for inspiration, waiting to have an intuitive thought or an intuitive feeling, and going and doing the next right thing. So let's practice a little meditation, a little conscious contact with God, continuing to take in this energy. Noticing what you feel, intending to take this energy in. which takes us to step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So it's the longest step. First and foremost, there's a promise that if you work through the previous 11 steps, you will have a spiritual awakening. And that is my experience. Every time I've worked through the steps, I've had a profound, not necessarily a fireworks kind of spiritual awakening, but a profound deepening of my connection with the divine, understanding of what ego, what selfishness is, so forth and so on. It's been very profound. Carry this message to others. The thing is that, for a hardcore addict to stay well, they need to continue this spiritual way of life, or they will fall back into the addiction. Now, interestingly enough, Bruno Groening, I don't have the exact quote, but he said that, the evil will attack where the body is weakest. Meaning, my understanding of that is if someone gets on the spiritual path and experiences a healing, but then steps off the spiritual path, the evil's just going to go to where there was the problem before. Like that's its point of entry. Bruno Groening also said, let me find the exact quote. It's a very, very powerful statement. He said, "He who was taught the truth is only on the path to God when he shares it with others." So there's this interesting thing about the need to share what's helped you with others. Now, Bruno Groening didn't tell people to learn a bunch of words and go sort of preach. He taught people some spiritual principles that they could then have an experience. And then he encouraged people to share from their own experience of what good is, what evil is, and how they freed themselves from evil. And the last part of step 12, practice these principles in all our affairs. Now, the thing is, the spiritual path is about not just sitting and meditating, but actually living these divine principles in every aspect of our life, to be thorough. And Bruno Groening called people to be very thorough. He said, examine every thought, every word, every deed. Whether it was proper thought to take up, whether it was the correct word to say, whether it was the right deed to do, to really call ourselves to, and we're going to fall short. That's part of being human and being in what Bruno called the school of life. But to constantly strive to grow and deepen spiritually and to live these things like faith, like peace, like wisdom, to apply it to our lives. So that's and interestingly enough, the 12 steps in step 11 calls people at the end of the day to review their day, just like Bruno Groening, to see where did I do well? Where did I fall short? What could I improve on? To continue to take inventory of ourselves and our lives and our behavior, and to strive to grow and improve. So this was just a very short introduction to the 12 steps, though I pretty much covered the basics. And for anyone who's new, of course, this is a very, very brief introduction to the teachings of Bruno Groening. What I love about the 12 steps is that they're structured. Now, Bruno Groening gave a lot of talks and said a lot of things, but he never sat down and wrote a book. And he never said, okay, this is all the components of the path. This is the instruction manual, as it were. to me, the 12 steps, the original, and that's something I wish I'd said at the beginning. What I'm talking about now is the original version of the 12 steps. It's become quite changed over the years. But at the very beginning, it was very simple and it was very focused and based on this idea of relying on a higher power. I'm sad to say it's evolved in many ways and gotten away from that original message. But what I just shared, you can find in this little book it's called just Alcoholics Anonymous, also known as the Big Book. And it's literally an instruction manual for how to surrender to God and be guided by God. I think if I could only have one book, I think it would be this book, because it's the clearest set of this is what you do to connect to God, to remove the blockages to connection to God, and then how to live your life. Specifically, keeping an eye out for things that block you from God, which Bruno told us to keep an eye out for the thoughts that disconnect us, to constantly seek knowledge of what's God's will in religious terms. What's God's will for us? Said maybe spiritually, what is spirit? What's the next inspired action? To be guided by the divine instead of to be guided by sort of self or selfishness. And then to help others, to be of service. It's a very profound way of life. And the teachings of Bruno Groening have deeply informed my understanding of the 12 steps, and my understanding of the 12 steps have deeply, deeply informed my understanding of what Bruno Groening taught. And the 12 steps are based in the teachings of Christ. And Bruno Groening said what he taught was simply the teachings of Christ. So in essence, there's no surprise at how similar they are. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining in, for taking this time to allow me to share on two of my deepest passions, 12 steps and the authentic teachings of Christ as shared by Bruno Groening. Thanks to everyone for saying hello. Hi, Jisoo. Hey, Claudie. You're very welcome, Magdalena. I'm forever loving everything. Thank you all for joining in. To anyone who's new to this channel, a very warm welcome. I hope you can find and see the resonance between what Bruno Groening taught and the original 12-step program. So let's close with a little meditation that I'll lead us through. I'll walk us through all 12 steps. Please, God, please, beloved higher power, help us to be humble and recognize that we need you. We need your power to live well, to overcome the problems of life, and ultimately to overcome the negative force. Please help us to deepen our faith, deepen our trust in your power, and help us to be willing in every situation to recognize that whatever problem we're facing, you can and ultimately will solve that problem. Please help us be devoted to seeking you and following you and recognizing that our well-being is dependent on you. As Bruno Groening said, we cannot lift ourselves up. Only God can do that. And so we make a decision now, God, to strive for you, to seek to follow you and be closer to you. Please help us to recognize all the things within us that are not good, that block us off from you. Please help us to be honest with ourselves and you, God, and if it feels right, with another person. And help us be willing to release everything, every belief, every habit, every pattern, everything that cuts us off from you, beloved Maker. Right here, right now, and as we go through our days, Let's ask that everything we're aware of that blocks us from God and everything we become aware of, then we ask that it be removed. Please help us to become aware of those we've harmed in the past and how we can make it right, and guide us in so doing. And please help us to continue to be mindful of, especially of thoughts, but also habits that block us from you, beloved divine. And very quickly ask that they be removed. As we go through our day, please help us to feel your presence and seek your presence, to know your will and to do your will. And for all the help you've given us, beloved divine, thank you. Please help us now to go and to help others and to deepen these spiritual principles in every aspect of our life. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Amen. Thank you for that beautiful comment. Forever loving everything. And Magdalena, I feel a deep peace as well. Feels very holy, like something very sacred, very holy. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Take care. Much gratitude and much love. And let's have a day full of going through the day asking, Spirit, Source, God, I'm no longer running the show. How can I serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. Thanks so much for joining in. Take care. Much love.